Hello, hello, and welcome to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and my amazing co-host is,
Hello, I'm Megan.
we are your messy, imperfect, progressive. I feel like that's important to say, especially right now. Homeschool mom friends. We both love homeschooling and we love being with our kids, but we'll never show up here pretending that our lives are Instagram perfect because they just aren't.
Exactly. That phony approach has really created a whole culture of people who think they totally have their shit together. What's wrong with me? And logically, we all know that the person that you're seeing on Instagram is only showing you the best part of their life and the super polished approach, right? But there's still this phenomenon that has done a real number on people's mental health during this era of social media sharing, of really struggling to realize that we're doing a good job. We're okay. That's not reality. So today, for our episode, we'll be diving into an in-depth discussion on giftedness. We both have diagnosed gifted kiddos. So this has been part of our journey for many years now. And on that journey, I think we find that it is greatly misunderstood in the world of both mainstream education and homeschooling. But speaking of not presenting a polished image and making everyone feel like crap about themselves, we love to keep it real and just kind of share a recap of our weeks. Some weeks are awesome. Some weeks are a hot mess. So what's up with you, Amanda? What's new?
This week has been pretty easy, actually. So we're still in Tuscany, which I know we're really fortunate to be able to say that. And schooling is going fine. The kiddo got locked out of his computer schooling system because technically he homeschools in California. And so anytime we log on to his free programs that he gets through his charter school from outside of the United States, they block the computer. So he didn't have access to it for a large part of the week because it took him a while to unlock it for us. But we got that sorted. Our biggest problem has been it's cold here right now. And that's fine, right? We were expecting it to be cold, but we're in this really historic villa, which is also fine. And it's got brick floors, and that's fine. We're not big complainers. There's jumping spiders that keep coming out of my bed, and that's fine.
Oh, no, that's not fine in my world.
Put them out the window. It's fine. Okay. There are these weird flat brown bugs that randomly show up. And that's fine. We're dealing with that. But I just about broke his week because I was like, I am so cold. I'm so cold. I don't understand what is going on. I don't understand why I'm so cold. I have 3 layers on, top and bottom. I was wearing this wool scarf around my head. My kiddo kept calling me Little Red Riding Hood. Every chance I got, I was crawling into bed with my hot water bottle under the great big comforter. I don't understand what is going on. Why am I so cold? And then today, our friend who helps co-manage this place came over and she was like, oh, it's time for me to refill the heater with the pellets. They use this pellet system here that's more eco-friendly. I'm like, okay, fine. I can't imagine it needs refilled. We've been so cold. And I'm like the radiators aren't even turning on. I don't know. Can you turn it up a little or something so that it's oh, hey, it's only 59 degrees in here. I should kick on. Come to find out, there was some kind of a power surge and the heater has been off for who knows how many days. No wonder we've been cold. Oh no. It's 32 degrees at night and we're in this old, poorly insulated villa. Actually. So that's been exciting, but it's been really toasty this afternoon. So we're pretty happy.
Oh, that's much better. Oh, thank goodness.
I can't believe we went so many days, all week. I'm it's just getting colder and colder. What is going on? So yeah, I'm really happy today.
And that's one of the worst, of the champagne problems, right? Of our first world issues. That's one of my worst things is when you get that chill that's all the way inside of you and you just cannot get warm. For me, I'm not a huge lover of soups or hot drinks and things like that. So for me, when I get that way, it's a hot shower is the only thing that will finally get me fully warmed up. But yeah, it stinks when you're in that thing where you're just frozen to the inside and you just feel so chilly. So Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're finally going to be toasty. That stinks. Yeah.
The adventure, right?
The jumping spiders would be a no from me though. Like 100%. That's a no.
The first time I tried to catch one with the glass and that little shit jumped, I was like, this is, but I just like, it's okay. It's okay.
Got this.
Yep.
I will say you're a little bit right now, at least for me. I don't know how I am for you, but for me right now, you look like when I watch The Empress on Netflix and the mouth is doing one thing and the audio is doing another thing. I can hear you well, but if anybody's watching on video, just know Amanda and I, we both enjoy world schooling and we both podcast from really oddball places sometimes. So your audio sounds great. If you're only listening to audio, everybody's going to be like, that's amazing. If you're watching on video, you know, it's like watching, think of us as like a foreign show on Netflix. It'll be fine.
It'll all be good. Everything's just a little out of sync.
Exactly. But it'll be good. So very good. Well, I'm glad you're having an awesome week. We're doing okay too. It's been busy, like just super busy. So I mean, I feel like since we started this podcast, I've been talking about the fact that we've been moving, but it's just been like the move that never ends. So first it was months and months and months to sell our house in South Carolina. And then we left there in October. And we've kind of been bopping around ever since. We traveled for a bit. We did some world schooling pop-ups and blah, blah, blah. Right. And so we are finally, I paid for our apartment yesterday. I paid our down payment and I signed the lease the other day. So I know it feels so good to just like know we have a spot. So we go on Monday and kind of move in and do our thing for a little bit. We're still going to travel. We're literally going to be there for a week and then we're traveling. So that's fine. But at least it'll be like our stuff is all in one spot. We can organize our stuff. We'll have a place, right? Like right now, we've kind of just been carrying so many things with us and we're losing more things than we should be because we're not organized, because we're kind of in this like interim staging period. So it'll be nice. I'm super excited to get into our new place, have a spot, go to IKEA, get some dishes, get some mattresses, like make a day of it and sort of like feel like we have a little bit of stability, which will be nice after such a long period of transition and moving. So that'll be good. But we have one storage locker that's in Miami with the last of our worldly possessions. We sold basically everything when we sold our house in South Carolina. And so this week has been purging that one last time. And so we took up like the entire aisle at storage. We just barricaded both ends because Liam brought Waffles, his service dog, to storage every day. And so we would just unclip her and let her relax because she was really, she didn't need to be like working while we were at storage. And we had really long days while we were there. So we would just kind of clip off both ends so that she couldn't leave our little aisle. And then our whole aisle was just piles, right? It was like donation, sell on Facebook Marketplace, take to Portugal by air, take to Portugal with the freight forwarder, like all this kind of stuff. My husband works in Aruba, so stuff that dad's going to need in Aruba. So it was like piles, and then all of that. But so the days were just like exceptionally long, but we've been getting stuff done and it feels good and the end is in sight. So I'm super pumped about that. It'll feel nice to kind of have a spot, which will be good.
For sure. And for anyone who's watching the video, you managed to go get your haircut. This is a topic in our Facebook group about whether or not you should cut it all off or not. And so you did. It looks very cute. I'll be curious to see how it works when you have to do it yourself with your waves.
So I actually feel like, so when she cut it today, I mean, I chopped off not quite enough to donate. I was like a little bit bummed. I was like just short of donation length, but she chopped off a lot. So we weren't quite sure if this was going to be a good length or if it needed to go shorter. Amanda and I both have curly hair. And so it's like when it's wet, you never know how it's going to dry and all that kind of stuff. So we dried it most of the way curly to see what it was going to look like, and then wet it a little bit and dried it straight to see if it was going to be too long for what I was going for, if it was straight. So I have seen it both ways. The funny thing is I am not loving it blown straight like this. Like I'm glad we did it because I wanted to know before I left that it was like the right length and whatever. But I actually feel like I look like an old librarian or something, which there's nothing wrong with that look, but like it's just not what I'm used to when I look in the mirror. And so I'm kind of like, oh, okay. So, and it was funny because even one of my kids was like, I keep doing a double take when I look at you and your hair is blown so straight. I'm like, I know the next time I wash it, it'll be wavy again. So, but yes, it has all been chopped off. I feel like I've gotten a huge physical and like just baggage, right? Like ditching of
Yeah.
baggage. It's just so much to take care of. It's so thick and it's so girly and it's just so much hair. So yeah, I mean, half the time it was just in like a big messy knot on top of my head because I had reached the point where I'm like, I don't even know what to do with this anymore. So chopping it felt very good today. So that was wonderful. Yeah. So we're making some progress here. Life is chugging along. So all right. So giftedness. All right. So we've talked about before the fact that homeschoolers, our culture and our communities, even though we're not part of the public school system, and many of us have made a very conscious choice to not be part of the public school system, we're still greatly affected by what the public school system is doing, right? I mean, you're in these Facebook groups and people every day are saying, like, what should my third grader be doing? My third grader's behind this, that. That's all coming from the public school system being kind of like the one true north of education, that for right or wrong, for better or for worse, everybody else either is comparing themselves to or society is comparing us to. And so whatever the public school system is doing when it comes to giftedness is going to trickle over into our world, whether we like it or not. And unfortunately, when it comes to giftedness, at least in my experience, we'd love to know what your experience has been in the comments. The public school system has a lot of it wrong. Dare I say most of it, all of it wrong when it comes to giftedness. Yeah. So we're finding that effect is trickling over into the homeschooling world. And so we thought we would just kind of do a deep dive on giftedness in general. I say deep dive. Amanda said a while back, like we could do like a 6-part series on giftedness. So as deep a dive as we can do in one episode, and perhaps we'll do more in the future.
Yeah. And that whole point about what's happening in the public schools trickling over into the world of homeschooling, it is so true. So I have a 5th grader on paper, and he's doing, all sorts of junior high and high school level work already, which is really common if you've got a gifted kiddo, especially in certain areas. We'll talk about that later. But I recently tried to join my local group for homeschoolers planning to attend college. I thought that I might get some really useful information, maybe about state-specific things or, like interesting college classes or dual enrollment or AP options and things like that. Initially, they said that my kiddo was too young. Okay. But then they gave me a chance to explain. And like they said, oh, your kiddo has to be in middle school. And I was like, well, depending on where you're from, 5th grade is middle school, but okay, fine, whatever. And then they said, well, if you want to explain your specific situation, feel free. And so I did. And the moderator came back to me and said, what, the best thing you can do for your kiddo is to absolutely do not graduate him early. Keep him in high school, taking all the dual enrollment and AP classes until he's 18. And I was pretty floored that this was the advice from a homeschooling group, right? Like I could totally see that coming from public education, wherever, whatever. Like there's a lot of myth out there about how bad acceleration is, even though the research for the most part shows acceleration, grade acceleration is actually a good thing. There's a lot of myth in the public schools about how it's a bad thing. But the idea that in a homeschooling group specifically, they're like, yo, have your kid do 6 or 7 years of high school level schoolwork and, take as many dual enrollment classes as possible, even though his target schools won't even accept them. I was just like, Lasai, like, what is this even about? Like, I mean, first off, it's silly, but then second off, like, who even wants to spend 7 years in high school? Like, certainly not most gifted kids.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah. So,
well, and I just love the idea that even though, your kiddo's in 5th grade, that you couldn't even join the group. It's like, for me, I'm a person who likes to see far into the future because I've talked before about the fact that I'm like a super anxious person, right? And so I am already worrying about things that could potentially, maybe, slim chance happen 8, 10, 15 years from now, right? So if I'm homeschooling a really young kid and I'm thinking, okay, this is going well, but what on earth am I going to do about college? And that's like keeping me awake at night. The ability to join a group where I could at least see what the future looks like. I mean, okay, I'm probably not going to join the group and contribute because I don't have anything to contribute, but just to watch what other people have going, like, just why is this information being gate kept anyway? I mean, just
right?
come join the conversation. Hello. Right. So I don't know. Tell her I graduated my kid just before his 16th birthday. She'll love that. Right.
Right. Or the other one who started her associate's degree at what age, like.
Yeah, she got accepted at 12 and I think started right before her 13th birthday, maybe, or after her 13th birthday. I forget, but she got accepted at 12 into the program, I remember. So yeah, I'm like, no, that's not how that
Whatever
works.
you do not graduate them early. Like, okay.
All about that, right? Yeah. Yeah. So definitely a fair amount of misunderstanding out there about these kiddos. So, okay. So let's start off with understanding giftedness to begin with, right? Giftedness is neurodivergence, right? It falls under the category of neurodivergence, the same way dyslexia, autism, ADHD, Tourette's, etc. All of these things, it's a difference in brain wiring. It is a physical difference, a neurological difference in the way that your kiddo's brain works. So it falls under the category of neurodivergence. And a lot of times people are thinking that it relates to high grades or academic achievement, right? You know, my kid read 50 books, my kid scored this on this. That's fantastic. That is not necessarily giftedness. Those two things can overlap. You can have that overlap with giftedness, but that alone does not equal giftedness. So oftentimes, and who does this happen in my house? It involves asynchronous development. That's a definite for us. Intense curiosity. Oh, heck yeah. That's how I had a 12-year-old applying for college, because there was this deep need for information that she was ready for and couldn't find anywhere else. Emotional intensity. Oh, shit. Yes. That's why I'm so tired all the time. And a very unique thought process, which is definitely the case. So yeah, we check all those boxes, and it has made parenting an amazing adventure and an exhausting adventure.
Yeah, no, for sure. So if you are new to this whole thing, you stumbled across our podcast because you're like, I think maybe my kid is gifted and maybe these guys will help me figure it out. Let's talk about asynchronous just for a minute. So there are two, generally speaking, there are two types, right? There's a kid who's generally asynchronous, and there's a kid who's academically asynchronous. And a lot of times they're both, but not always. So generally, you might have a 7-year-old who is anywhere from 2 to 5 grades ahead in school subjects. They may be more than twice their age when it comes to thinking about big issues. Gifted kids love to worry about things like climate change and extinction events and other really big philosophical things that most grown-ups can't even be bothered to really noodle on, right? And then they might be the social emotional age of a 5-year-old. You know, they might be a couple years behind their actual age. If that's not the case or that doesn't apply, you might find that you're looking at a kiddo who's asynchronous in a pretty straight academic way. And that might look something like your kiddo being 2 or 3 grade levels ahead in math, 5 or 6 grade levels ahead in reading and most ELA, but maybe only grade level in writing and composition, right? And then anywhere in between all of those with science and history and art and whatever else you're choosing to do with your kiddo, right? It's this idea that you're just, it's all over the place with your kiddo, and you're trying to make sure that you're hitting what they need. And you're definitely not buying those like 5th grade 180-day workbook packet. Like that is not going to fly.
No.
So like a fun example of what this might look like is my kiddo had a goal of joining Mensa. And so we did that for him. He joined Mensa. And last year we went to the Mensa conference. They do a big annual conference in every region and also every country, I think, maybe continent, but maybe by country. And at this conference, they have a kids track specifically that you can pay for and the kids can go to. And then they have all kinds of other lectures for all of the adults there. And for the most part, my kiddo enjoyed going to the kids track. They did things like design zoo enclosures that allow for adaptability and are environmentally conscious and all of those kinds of things. And then they played silly games that were like things that were kind of irreverent and funny and whatever, you know, like he just had a good time with it. But every morning he woke me up to make sure that I attended the 9 a.m. lecture on war history. And every morning at 9 a.m., they covered a different war with people who had actually had some kind of a personal stake in that war, had been involved, or their grandparents had been involved, and you know, and it covered all kinds of different things. But we had to be there. And he was the only kid in every one of those seminars. And we're talking like 500 people in this room. And he's the only kid there, just absolutely absorbed and super into it. Then on the flip side, there was one afternoon where he wanted me to take him out of the kids' programming early so that he could go to one on quantum physics. And there were at least 20 other kids from the kids program there for the quantum physics one, right? Like it's that sort of thing where like they're just kind of all over the place. And you have to, well, you don't have to, but it's probably best if you can find a way to embrace whatever their interests are and give them those opportunities. Like, yeah, some people might have looked at us and there might have been a few comments about whether or not we should have been at this particular seminar or that one. Those are old fuddy-duddy people that we're not really cared about. We don't, like we're not concerned about them. Like they're not our problem. We were there to get what we wanted out of it. And I'm happy to support it. I may have played more games on my phone than completely necessary because not my thing, but it was absolutely my 10-year-old's thing. And I'm happy to let it nerd out at those things, right? So those are the kinds of things that you're going to see with an asynchronous child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we've had asynchronous situations as well, right? So if you're new to the podcast, my kids are 17, 15, and 13. My 17-year-old went to school for 3 years. That last year was really just us trying to figure out a way to make school work. We already knew by the end of the second year that it wasn't working. And I was holding on. We were running, the school psychologist was testing and we were having meetings and blah, blah, blah. It was not going to work. And it was a total mess. But in any event, he was there for 3 years. And it was interesting because there are people in the world of education or your family or society as a whole that will try to make you doubt the fact that you know what to do for your kid or that you can support your kid properly or that you can educate your kiddo properly. And let me tell you that when we finally got to that third year and I had waited ages for this ridiculous IEP meeting to roll around, and I sat there and the school psychologist is there and there's, one of his teachers was there. He had 2 teachers because he was in a biliterate program. One of his teachers was there. There were a couple of other people. It's been a while. I don't remember. But these are all experts, right? These are people that have higher education degrees in education and psychology and child development and all of this. And they all sat there like, I don't have a clue what to do with this kid. He is off the charts in reading. Like his vocabulary could not be measured. He had tapped out from the scale at the age of 7. But he could barely write his name on a piece of paper. And to this day, he can barely tie his shoes, right? And so they were like, and he couldn't tell time on a regular clock, on an analog clock, right? They're like, we have no idea what to do with this kid because to them, that wasn't gifted. A kid who was gifted in some areas, but not gifted in others was not a gifted child. And I was younger then and I didn't have quite the experience that I have now with homeschooling. And so I'm sitting there thinking, oh, gee, what do we do with this kid? Come to find out that's completely typical in the world of gifted, right? Like
So common.
All these experts didn't know that this was typical for gifted children. And so I'm like, just if you're sitting there doubting your ability to do what's best for your child, stop. You can do it. This room full of experts had no clue what to do with my kid. So the other thing that we kind of talk about when we talk about giftedness is we started out with this discussion about high achieving, right? And there really has been this conflation of the two topics where the waters have gotten so muddy that it's hard to tell what's going on, right? And it's definitely a Venn diagram. You definitely have gifted kids who are high achieving kids who are gifted, but then you have kids who squarely exist in either of those categories who are not, they're high achievers, but they're not gifted, etc. You have gifted kids who are gifted in one way, but not high achieving necessarily academically. That's completely possible. And then you have the crossover between the two, right? So in my public school experience, we live in a socioeconomic area where there's a lot of keeping up with the Joneses and being cautious of how you present to the world and how you appear to other people. And that's just the world that we've lived in when we lived in South Florida. And so here, having your kids in gifted is a status symbol. So that's a whole separate ball of wax. The thought process here is that the best teachers will be in gifted. So if you want your kids to have the best of the best, they have to be in gifted. And so that became a thing here where the goal was to get your kid into gifted no matter how you did that. We did our testing through the school psychologist. A friend of mine who had much older children told me to do that. She said, if you go private and you show up at the school with this piece of paper and plunk it down on the counter and be like, what are you going to do to accommodate my kid? Not that I would do that, but not that I would necessarily speak to someone that way, but they're so used to having that happen from all of these Karens that they get their back up and they're less willing to work with you. So she said, I know the wait for the school psychologist is long because they're trying to get so many kids through, but just wait, because if they've done the testing, they'll believe in the validity of the testing and they'll be more likely to work with you. So I did, and I waited, and it took forever, but I saw that even when they had a test that they believed was valid, they still didn't know what to do with my kids. So it made the decision to homeschool that much easier. But yeah, it became this status symbol to have a gifted kid, which meant you had first graders and second graders in tutoring so that they could stay in gifted.
Yeah. And I will say, I definitely know that in more affluent areas, especially, it is not uncommon for parents to essentially buy a gifted diagnosis so that they can do that with the school. Like, that's not cool. I am pro private assessment because our experience was we went, well, we'll talk about it later, but when we went through the public school version, like the public school had absolutely no idea how to assess a kiddo that had learning disabilities and was also gifted. And they completely, I, I was literally sending them paperwork and publications from the testing companies saying, like, when you have a standard deviation of more than 1.5, that means this. And I was like, what about the general ability index? Like, there's a huge, he's got 50, 60 points difference on some of these. And they're like, well, that just means that he's normal. It's not that he's normal. That's works at all. That's not how you use this test. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So, if you choose to go through your local school district, keep that in mind. Not all are as capable.
Yeah.
But that leads us in. Yeah.
Well, then I was going to say my goal of using the school system was because I thought we were going to stay there and I wanted them to be my partners in this. We did private testing after the fact, right? We did a full analysis afterwards for a whole bunch of other stuff after the fact, which not everyone can do. And I know that's
it is. Yeah. We'll talk about it. It's much more expensive, but it was also much more thorough and helpful, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, but my initial assessment was mainly thinking, okay, fine. If I'm going to stay at the school, then I'll be paired with the psychologist who knows my kid really well. And I'll have more buy-in from the school and things like that. But, we started this section by talking about, emotional dysregulation and things like that. And I think it was absurd. It was something like 18% of our school system was gifted or something when we which is like not statistically how the population works, right? But I'm sitting there and I'm like, all of these women who are like, my child is gifted. And I'm like, if you truly understood some of the challenges that come along with a gifted neurotype, you wouldn't be sitting there being like, oh, my child, right? Like the emotional dysregulation piece alone is so epic, at least in our, that I'm like, it's a trade-off, let me tell you, right? It is a huge trade-off. So it's not necessarily all it's cracked up to be all the time. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. So
yeah, no, for sure. All right. So our second point that we want to talk about is, how do you know if your child is gifted? So I often say that I'm the asshole who found out just how gifted my kid was when I took him to be assessed for a learning disability. And the educational psychologist came out and said that he was the smartest kid she'd ever assessed. Okay. Like, that's me. I'm that one. But let me start from the beginning. For us, even from a young age, people, they kind of always told us, you know what I mean? I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but we just be in situations or things and people, oh, he's really smart. Yeah, he's really special. He's really smart, and like, I mean, you kind of know it as the parent. You're kind of like, I mean, yeah, he's got a big vocabulary. He knows a lot of things. He does a lot of things, but also he was our first. He's our only. And so, we were just like, yeah, okay. Our first real confirmation was when he tested for the Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth program. So it's commonly referred to as CTY. If you're just getting into gifted anything, you'll probably hear CTY fairly often. It's pretty common. So he first tested it. They do a very special, unique, different test. There are some other tests that can get you in, but they have their own test called the SCAT test. And he did it at 7 and he got in. But honestly, he just squeaked in. And I was like, okay, so he's smart, maybe just on the border of gifted. And let me be clear, we were totally fine with that. I don't want anyone listening to this to think like, oh, my child isn't profoundly gifted or their IQ isn't way off the charts. Like, it doesn't count. Like, it doesn't matter. And we didn't care. We were totally fine with wherever he felt. We were just looking to find a place. We wanted some classes that challenged him. We wanted him to be able to maybe go to a camp where he met some peers that actually understood him, that he could connect with. Like, gifted kids, they're their own unique little people, and they're not going to connect with the vast majority of kids in a standard classroom or a standard summer camp or whatever you're looking at. And so that was our goal, right? After that, or at that point, and for a couple years on, I just had these concerns about a learning disability. I'm not going to go exactly into what it was because I want to protect his, just his information. It's not mine to put out there. And we keep getting blown off, right? He had been in a kind of school program, and we're still in a program where he has a public school teacher, like oversight person who does state standardized testing and assesses him for different things and stuff like that. And it was just kind of this idea like, no, he's great. He's really smart. He's fine. Don't worry. Like, there's nothing wrong. That mom gut thing, right? Like, I'm certain that something isn't quite working the way that it ideally would work. So I went to our pediatrician, who was super supportive and not at all surprised that our local school district wasn't receptive to my concerns, right? She was like, we already know he's gifted. And it's pretty easy to see, both in talking to him and based on his standardized test scores, he didn't have problems with those things. So she was like, they're not going to do anything to help you. But here are my recommendations. Here's a specialist who assesses for exactly what you think might be the problem. They're the person to go see. They'll be able to tell you if there is actually a problem or not. And obviously, it turns out we were right. I learned way more. I didn't know exactly what we were looking at. It's not one of the more common learning disability diagnoses. And so I have learned a ton, and our assessor was super, super helpful. But yeah, in this process of having this learning disability identified, we also found that it was really hiding just how high his IQ is. Okay. So all of that said, I am going to back up just one step and say, if you want to test for giftedness, if you're just doing giftedness for whatever reason, you really should do some research online and use someone who specializes in assessing gifted children. A learning disabilities or medical diagnosis assessment, it will give you an IQ number, but they aren't necessarily great at figuring out how gifted a kiddo is once you get above that 130, they're gifted kind of line. Also, IQs of today do not equal IQs of previous generations. Mm-hmm. Most assessors today only score up to 160. The tests are designed to only go up to 160. With the new tests, okay, they're designed to go up to 160. They can go above that, but you have to have special training and you have to have special tests that go above that. And very few doctors and assessors actually know how to do this. With the new tests that are given today, a 140 is in the top 0.5% of the population. Okay, so 140 IQ is a percentage, the entire population, right? And statistically speaking, only 1 in 20 million same age children would be expected to obtain an IQ over 180. Okay, these are important. I hear people, I'm in groups and things, I hear people, my kiddo has a 190. My kiddo is 175. Like these numbers back in the day, you would have been more likely to get those numbers. Scores were regularly in the upper hundreds, and gifted was, 180, 190, 200. It wasn't uncommon. These days, with the way the new scores are, they are much lower. Okay. So do not look at it and think you look at some famous person in the past that had this crazy high score and you're like, oh, my kid's 50 points below them. They must not actually be a genius. Like, the scores are very different. So please just keep that in mind. You can come talk to us at one of our Q&As if you want, or, whatever. We can talk about that more if you have more questions about that. One last point I want to make about specific testing is if you do an actual IQ assessment, you will get an FSIQ, which stands for full scale IQ score, right? Full scale. That's it's pretty common, and most people have an FSIQ. But there is also this thing called the GAI, and that's a General Abilities Index. This is a totally valid IQ score if your child has a learning disability. Okay, if they have a learning disability that is causing huge variations between different sections of the test, often, not always, around processing speed and working memory, they will be given a GAI score from the assessor. If you have a twice exceptional kiddo, that's what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
The GAI score is your child's IQ. Now, obviously, there's confidence intervals and all of that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, if the paperwork you get from anyone assessing your child includes a GAI score, that score is going to be higher than the FSIQ score. And when someone asks you what your kiddo's IQ is for whatever purpose or reason, you give them that GAI number, because that is the number that actually assesses their intelligence, not whether or not they got hung up on how quickly they can recall things or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I was laughing really hard when you said find somebody who focuses on gifted kids or specializes with gifted kids, because when the difference, right, when we did the private assessment versus the school assessment, my kid would just stop participating in the test at a certain point. He could sense when he had reached like a specific threshold and was like, I'm done answering your questions, and would just flat out refuse to answer the questions at that point. Now, at that point, he was in a really unhealthy place mentally because school did a real number on my kid, right? And so he was not the easiest to work with in some of those cases and whatever, but I laughed so hard when the assessor was like, he just sat there and stared me down until I went into a new section. And I was like, I am not surprised, but thanks for the luck. Yeah, I see. So finding somebody who knows how to work with kids who have this different neurotype, very important, right? Oh my gosh. Okay. So we have more gifted discussion coming your way. Super exciting. We have tons to discuss. In the meantime, we wanted to say a big thank you to our premier sponsor, Hub of Curiosity. They offer classes on OutSchool that are top rated and super popular. Amanda and I are both OutSchool parents, and we are the first to admit that OutSchool can be quite spendy. Hub of Curiosity recently did a major revamp, and now all of their group classes and self-paced classes are $12 or less. So you don't need a coupon code. It isn't an introductory price where like the first week is $5 and then it jumps to $20 or something like that, right? Every day, regular price, all class experiences, $12 or less. The classes are high quality. They're budget friendly. You'll find everything from multi-sensory classes for multiplication and spelling to engineering classes that explore every component you could possibly find inside a car. There is literally something for everyone. There's a link for anyone who is new to OutSchool in the description that will take $20 off your first class. And if you have any questions about this resource, come and chat with us. We are both OutSchool moms. We're super happy to help. The catalog can be a little bit overwhelming. We'll be more than happy to tell you how we each scan for, what we're looking for, how we sort it out, and how we do a pretty good job of mostly finding classes that our kids love. Like every once in a while, you're going to find one that's like, but generally speaking, we can hit the nail on the head. So if you're looking for tips on how to read the class descriptions and find a winner, join our Facebook group, come to one of our Patreon Q&As. We'd be happy to help. So thank you for your support of our podcast. And now back to giftedness.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we talked about number 2. Number 3 is this, this is a big, this could be like a 4-part series all on its own, right? But it's important to touch on it if we're doing a giftedness overview. And that is, gifted kids can struggle just like any other kid. And parenting gifted kids isn't as easy as others assume it is. Okay. So Meagan was alluding to that earlier. Gifted kids might underachieve. It might be because they aren't interested. It might be because they aren't being challenged enough. It might be because they're gifted in math and they could care less about ELA and they're not going to write you a paragraph or a 5-paragraph essay. It doesn't matter how much you beg them or what it means to their future, right? Gifted kids might also struggle with executive function skills or social skills. We kind of talked about those. Those would fall under that asynchronous stuff that we were talking about before. Here on our podcast, we have talked a lot about executive function skills in a few different episodes. So if that's an issue, go give those other episodes a listen. They will be very helpful in coming up with some skills and techniques and ideas and different things to try, and learning how to let go of some things. Being the parent of a gifted kid is a lot about letting go of your expectations and what you thought was going to happen as a parent, and learning how to embrace what's actually happening as a parent. It's also really important to remember that it's very common for gifted kids to have what's called overexcitabilities and intensities. Okay. It's very common. It's normal. There isn't necessarily anything wrong with it or them, right? This is not saying because you think your kid is gifted and they have these things that you should just lump them all together. Obviously, we're pro diagnosis in all of the ways, right? Like don't overlook things that might be something else, because it's easier to overlook them. But it is also important to know that gifted absolutely comes with overexcitabilities and intensities. And if you read only one book about gifted children, please, 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 please make it the essential guidebook for parents of gifted children. I'll make sure I drop an affiliate link. I'll share it on social media, all of that jazz. I have read so many books on gifted children. I've read books on parenting gifted children. I've read books on raising them. I've read books on homeschooling them. Seriously, if you only read one book, make it the essential guide for parents of gifted children. I read this book. I got on an airplane with it. I'm reading it. I'm spending the whole time going, oh my God, I can't look at this. Read this right here, to my husband who was sitting next to me. I have never read another book in my entire life that I saw both myself and my child so much in nearly every page of the book. I got off of that airplane and called one of my best friends from college. We were in this like special honors program together with other kids who were tapped to be in the honors program. And I was like, I have this book. You absolutely have to get it. I have never read a book that describes me in my life so much, and you need to read it for both self-understanding and to help you better understand your daughter. And she was like, okay, you're being a little crazy right now, but just send me a link. Like, I'm telling you, I have gifted this book to friends. I made my husband read it after I read him most of it on the plane. I told my mom to read it. This book, it's great information. It's so relatable. It's so easy to read. And it really does help explain this idea of over the sensitivities, the overexcitabilities, all of these kinds of things.
I have not read it. Now, I'm going to have to add it to my to be read pile. It's like, I'm listening long, but I'm going to do it. Yeah. And I mean, I can speak to this personally. I have 3 kiddos who are all twice exceptional kiddos. It is and all in different ways, which makes it really fun parenting, right? They all function completely differently.
Variety is the spice of life, I hear.
Exactly, right?
As the parent of an only child, I don't have that much variety, but you should have a very spicy life.
It's spicy, all right. It's tough, right, in this parenting world, because you sometimes have to excuse yourself from something or, reschedule something because of overexcitabilities. And you're like trying to explain to people and you feel like you're like an alien or something, trying to explain this existence that you're living to somebody who doesn't understand it. And you're like, I swear this is real. I'm not a lunatic. I'm not making this up. I'm not reading into things like this is how we live, right? So the most extreme example that we have in our home, and thankfully as my kiddo has gotten older, he's aged out of some of it, but my kiddo will literally become so overstimulated and so dysregulated through overexcitabilities that he will, if you're eating, this is your trigger warning, if you're eating, pause, right? Not right. He will literally get to a point where he throws up and throws up a lot, like endlessly, just endless vomiting until he eventually passes out. And he will pass out wherever. And this is a child who's an insomniac who's had sleep problems his entire life. And he will pass out on the floor in the middle of the living room with chaos around him. And this is a child who typically needs the most perfect ideal conditions to all align in order for him to sleep, right? So we have a handful of hours of vomiting, endless vomiting, until Emitrol finally kicks in and makes it stop, followed by anywhere from 3 to 6 hours of absolute comatose sleeping on the floor. And then when he wakes up, he's fine. He's absolutely fine. So it took me a while to figure out what on earth was going on when he was younger, because we'd have these things and I'm thinking he's picked up a stomach bug or it's food poisoning or something. And then he'd be fine and he'd be ready to go when he woke up. And I'm thinking he's sick or he's got food poisoning or something like that. And so I'm like, no, I don't think we should like jump back into regular life. And it took me a while to realize exactly what was happening. So we actually had to change the way that we celebrate things. For example, like his birthday needs to be a very calm event, right? It needs to be, there can't be a lot of hype. There can't be a lot of this, because he threw up on every single birthday for years. He threw up every time we went to Disney World. He threw up when we went to see Penn and Teller in Vegas, which is nothing but a compliment to Penn and Teller, but that is how exciting that experience was. I mean, it's life, right? So we just kind of rolled with it. We're like, oh, that was a vomit worthy event. Like that was big in his world, right? And so that just kind of became the thing, was you had to build in this time for him to vomit for hours, carry Emitrol anytime we would travel or anytime we did something exciting, build in time for sleep. And when he would wake up, he was ready to go. I mean, we had that one time we were supposed to go to Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween party, and those tickets cost a freaking fortune if you've never been. And his birthday's in October. So it was like a birthday combination thing. And there were costumes. Excitement was off the charts. And we went to Disney the day before. He woke up the next morning, threw up all morning, slept all afternoon. We went to Mickey's Halloween party that night and he was fine. It's like this reset button within his body where his body is just like, you have reached, like, I picture like every bad movie that's ever been made about a nuclear power plant having issues, right? When the alarms are going off and people are scrambling to like shut things down and, make it stop and all that's happening inside of his body. And the shutdown happens. And then when it comes back online, he's fine, but it can be very extreme. And, you're trying sometimes to have these conversations with people where you're like, oh, I can't make it today because my kid, he's in the vomiting stage now, but then he's going to sleep. And then like later today, he'll be fine. And people are like, you are clearly making this up. And I'm like, no, this has been going on for over a decade. I know exactly how this process works, right? Thankfully, he has grown out of, I'll say he's probably grown out of part of it. And we've also probably learned how to manage his expectations better to keep him a little bit more regulated around bigger events, to keep it so that we can kind of support him through those better. So it's probably a combination of those two things. But yeah, overexcitabilities can get pretty extreme. So I'd be curious to hear in the comments what your kiddos' OE responses are, because I can't be alone in this.
Yeah, no, I'm sure not. And I mean, that dovetails perfectly into kind of the next point of this, right? The parenting, being the parent, I would not change my child for anything. I wouldn't trade my kid in. I'm 100% positive you feel the same about all three of your kiddos. But I don't know how many times I tried talking to friends or family about the challenges that we were currently dealing with, like especially in the early days, right? When you're just trying to figure out what the hell is going on and what you're dealing with. And you're just really searching for answers and information in those early days and really thinking like, where's the book that was supposed to come with my kid? Because I didn't get the book, right?
The number of times I have said, this was not in what to expect when you were expecting. I'm like, I need to talk to that woman. I say that all the time.
Right, exactly. And so in those early days, like you're trying to talk to your friends and family, and like at best you get met with these blank looks. And so often the comments are basically like, well, you're the one that professes that you've got a gifted kid. So I think you're just really looking for problems. Like, really, there's no problem. Your kid is like, I don't know what you're complaining about. Your kid is fine. Right. If you're experiencing that, just know that you're not alone. Right. Trying to figure all of this out when there is so much stigma around giftedness is really freaking hard. If your kid is gifted in music or sports, no one is going to chastise you for bragging about their most recent sports achievement or musical performance or award, or talking through trying to figure out which soccer team to put them on next, or which gymnastics club to sign them up for to get the most out of it. But if your kiddo is academically gifted, you better keep that shit to yourself. The reality is there's so much to figure out, and other people are not going to be particularly helpful if they haven't walked it themselves.
I completely understand that. I will say, as a person who has a kiddo who's artistically gifted, I feel so uncomfortable even saying that. She's been labeled a prodigy by people that aren't me. And I still feel uncomfortable saying that because I sound like that mom, right? I just feel that. And you're trying to explain this wacky journey that you're on. But you feel awkward saying it. I do, at least anyway. I don't know. Tell us in the comments how you like. I feel, so I think even if it is like music or whatever, because every parent thinks their kid who can play chopsticks is musically gifted. So then it's like, you feel like when you say it, like people don't understand it, or you haven't quantified it enough or something. It's strange. The whole experience is just strange, right? Like this whole relating to other humans is weird and hard, even as adults.
Yeah. No, it is. It is strange. It is weird. It is hard. And if you have gone the route of getting any sort of testing and you have any kind of an IQ score that you're looking at, you should know that if your child has an IQ somewhere between 130 and 135, even though someone's going to tell you it's not that gifted, and you're probably going to get a piece of paper that says, oh, they're mildly gifted. And there's a page that comes up on the internet all of the time, and it says that anything over like 110, IQ of 110, kids are going to do good in school. That is not true. A kid with an IQ of 130 to 135 is going to need pretty significant changes to be made for successful learning. And those changes just keep increasing. The more your outlier is an outlier of the outliers, right? Mm-hmm. The more gifted you are on that scale, the more you have to be really proactive in changing what you're doing for your child so that they are not absolutely bored out of their mind and just stop trying altogether.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I would get a lot of times like, oh, your kid is probably bored in school. And for him, I mean, maybe that was the case, but I think part of it also was just that his brain didn't work the way that they were teaching. And so he couldn't relate to anyone or the way the material was coming at him or anything. Like I don't necessarily think it was boredom. That saying like he was on a different page. He was in a different book. He was like, this is just not how I do things. And I'm confused as to what on earth everyone here is doing. Right. No. So yeah, very significant changes needed to be made for that situation. So I completely understand. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the pitfalls of misdiagnosis. And if you are somebody who's running around being like, my kid's gifted, and you have not gotten a diagnosis, it is really hard to legitimately say, because there's a lot of things that can look like gifted that aren't gifted, right? So that's one thing, right? So non-traditional learners might be marginalized. And that's my kid. That's what I was just saying, right? I mean, he was on a different planet. If you have not watched, I know Amanda's seen it, Hannah Gadsby, one of my favorite comedians, the special Douglas, Hannah Gadsby was diagnosed autistic late in life, and she talks about her experience in school and being genuinely interested in learning, but being on a completely different wavelength than everyone else, and just being so confused as to why she was always in trouble or being ostracized, or why she wasn't able to get in the same groove as everyone else. And then being diagnosed autistic late in life was like, oh, now I get it. So yes, absolutely. My kiddo, 100%. They had no idea what to do with my child. None whatsoever. This group of quote unquote experts, right? So yes, non-traditional learners, which she absolutely is, completely can be marginalized. 2E children, twice exceptional children, might find that their giftedness is being hidden by a learning disability or another diagnosis. It's rare in my experience, just hanging out with other homeschool moms and being in so many homeschool groups. It's rare to find somebody with one diagnosis, right? I mean, it can happen. It of course happens, right? But I think the more thorough the testing you do, the more likely you are to end up with multiple diagnoses. So that is often the case. And so oftentimes, like Amanda says, like, she's that asshole, like, you might be too, right? Like, get in there and figure out exactly what's going on, because it might look like one thing, and then when you scrape away a few layers, you're like, oh, this is actually something completely different. And so the way that you proceed forward might be different. The pitfalls of misdiagnosis: frustration. Not knowing what you're working with is super frustrating for the kid, for you. It's just, you're constantly kind of just throwing darts at a wall in the dark if you don't know exactly what you're dealing with. And that's really challenging. And that leads into mental health struggles. And like you said, Amanda, before, as far as like not sharing everything, right? But yes, for one of my kiddos, it was to the point where they had become completely despondent, while we kind of searched for answers to figure things out. And so, yes, having those answers and then knowing what to put in place as a result of having those answers has changed everything. So there was an article that I found online, an organizational psychologist who specializes in neurodivergence. Her name's Nancy Doyle. And she had written an article that said, for many neurodivergent people, the lack of diagnosis does not protect them from the stigma of being different. They already are different. When a diagnosis is absent, the individual who can't read well, moves differently, or has special requirements is still noticed by colleagues. That could be also classmates. She goes on to say, as the classic ADHDer who was labeled quote unquote intense or quote unquote inconsistent, I wonder, would my early career have been any easier had I been diagnosed? This diagnosis could have prevented me from internalizing so much of what other people said about my behavior. It could have given me the opportunity to define myself without self-reproach. So there is this whole conversation about, should we diagnose? Will it help? Will it hurt? You have to know who you are as a human being. You just have to, because I mean, I think our second book we ever read in our podcast book club was Normal Sucks by Jonathan Mooney. And he talked about the fact that if we don't give these kids a proper label, they will give themselves their own labels. And those labels will sound like lazy, stupid, useless, right? So much worse than the label that a doctor is going to give them. So having the right label is absolutely tremendous.
Okay, so number 5 is how to structure homeschool for your gifted learner. Now, if you're not homeschooling and you're listening, you can absolutely listen to this and take away some nuggets of things you can do to supplement while you figure out what you're going to do. Or maybe you're happy in your school, but you want to supplement, by all means, go for it. If you're homeschooling, Meagan and I do it very differently, but we're going to give you a breakdown of how we each do it. If you've listened to us at all, you know that we homeschool very, very differently. And that's okay. That's the whole point of this podcast. So in our home, we use skill appropriate curriculum. So we're not doing the like, well, he's 10, so I'll buy 5th grade math from Saxon and 5th grade ELA from Evan Moore, or, level 5, build your library. And that's what we're going to do. It's very specific to where he's at and what he wants and what his needs are for that year. We try to focus on curriculum that goes deeper than standard classroom type curriculums. So that's going to be things like Beast Academy and Art of Problem Solving, Michael Clay Thompson for ELA curriculum. These are the ones that you see in gifted groups they talk about all the time. They're not going to work for every kid, but a lot of gifted kids enjoy this type of curriculum. We also supplement with a lot of camps. So like I mentioned before, the Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth, also known as CTY, and conferences like the Mensa conference. We do online classes. Some of the providers that we have found that really understand gifted kids are places like Online G3, Davidson Young Scholars, Athena's Advanced Academy. There are two Athena's academies. There's a regular homeschool one and there's a regular homeschool one and the Advanced Academy. Definitely make sure you're clear about where you're signing up. Again, CTY, they offer classes throughout the school year as well as their summer camps. Next Level Homeschool, ASU Universal Learner. They're all great for different reasons, but remember, they're not all going to be a good fit for your kiddo. So I really recommend going slow. I highly recommend trying out just one a semester, maybe even one a year, right? Like pick one, say we're going to see if Next Level Homeschool works for us. We're going to try a CTY this fall and see how that class works for us. If you double them up or, really go all in, you're not going to get a good idea if it's actually a good fit for you.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, we've had experience with ASU Universal Learner. My youngest is a mathaholic and took math last summer through ASU, and it was an awesome experience. So happy to chat about that with anyone. Come to one of our events and hang out with us, and happy to chat that through. I think one of the big things that in my experience, you can tell me if you're kind of on the same page, Amanda, is like the difference between high achieving and gifted in a lot of ways. There's always exceptions to every rule, right? But in the traditional education world, high achieving is more work, right? It's like instead of 10 vocabulary words, it's 15 vocabulary words. And that's the way it plays out a lot of times. In gifted, I think a lot of times it's about the thought process behind the work. It's a deeper thought process. It's more about problem solving. It's more integrative work as opposed to just a heavier workload. It's a very different approach than what the public school system is doing, which is just like load these kids up so that they don't get bored. That's not actually how one might want to go about doing that. For us, unschooling has been amazing. It's not nearly as specific or scientific as what Amanda will tell you. What I can say from about a decade of experience unschooling is when you give unschoolers the tools to explore anything and everything that interests them, you will never see them again. They will be so deep into these things that interest them, and they will go so far, and they will come to you with, hey, I found this museum that's like 7 hours away. Can we please go to this exhibit? I've already called and they have tickets available on Tuesday, right? I mean, that's kind of been my experience we've ended up in some really quirky places and having really unique experiences because my kids are finding these things and seeking them out. My daughter took this class last week it's artist driven. It's based out of Chicago. She found it. She signed up for it. She took the class. She did the homework, right? I'm pretty hands off with that kind of stuff, except to say yes to experiences because they're at that level now where I know that I can just kind of let them go and they will just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. So setting them free has been an amazing thing, and that they've learned to really follow their curiosity and regulate their learning in a way that works for them. They'll kind of tailor things and customize things in a way that works well for them. So it's been pretty awesome sauce. It's been a cool journey. Continuing on. We're not quite done yet, but yeah, it's been pretty awesome so far.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So if you enjoyed this episode, first, we hope you'll enjoy some of our other episodes. And second, please consider joining our Patreon. Any level helps support the time, effort, and money that goes into putting together and producing this podcast. We do have a $7 a month subscription level that gets you a monthly unit study. It's fully vetted. It comes with links. It's progressive, own voices, and truly all ages appropriate. You can actually see and download a free sample of what these look like over on our Patreon. So go check it out if you're at all interested. And even if you're not a free sample, hello. And then we also have a $12 a month subscription option, and that includes 2 live Zoom meetings every month with both of us, both Meagan and Amanda. One is a homeschool Q&A type call where we give personalized advice, we do brainstorming, talk about like your specific needs or what's going on. And then the other is, like happy hour, mom's night out type event. That's really just for adult community building. We can come together, meet other secular, progressive homeschool folks and just have that community that we're all so desperate for. So if you're interested, you can find the link for our Patreon in the description or show notes, depending on where you're listening or watching. It's also in the bio on Instagram, and it's on our website, homeschoolmomsunfiltered.com.
Absolutely. Yeah. Come hang out with us. We love a good Zoom connection. So we shall end our show for the week with our mantra, which is giftedness isn't the same as high achievement. It's about unique needs and potential. Embrace the whole child because their brilliance often shines in ways the world doesn't expect. In the meantime, thank you for joining us and happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.